introduction. All right, so welcome again. Oops, sorry, let me get to the right slide. All right, so my name again is Dominique Levine. I'm the managing partner of Winning by Design. Formerly, I was a CEO and a chief revenue officer of various companies, mainly in the software and other B2B space. Sari, my partner today on the webinar, has a long and illustrious career specifically in sales enablement, and most recently was at Microsoft, came there by way of an acquisition of Xamarin, which is also an investment of Insight Partners. So I think she'll be sharing some of her experiences from that time as well. So just quick background. So Winning by Design is a firm. We're a boutique consulting and coaching firm. We focus on sales as a science. We have about 40 people in different places in the world and in the United States and Canada, as you can see here. We have about 300 customers and have worked with a variety of Insight Partners companies already, as highlighted on this slide. We've worked on playbook design projects and also on building in-house sales academies. So that's sort of related training, coaching component to onboard new reps and get them to quota quickly. We do that not just, by the way, for sales, but as the topic indicates, we also focus on the entire revenue journey. So from account-based prospecting all the way through customer success and account management. Ultimately, we believe strongly, and that's the topic of today, that hiring star salespeople isn't the best way to grow. That a sales process is a process like any other, like lean manufacturing or Six Sigma, and that you can have a very scientific way to defining, measuring, benchmarking, and then incrementally improving your sales process and thereby your sales productivity and sales performance. And needless to say, sales playbooks are sort of a critical core component of how you do that. And thus we will be talking about that today. But we're really sort of flipping the pyramid and moving from a superstar culture where it's about, you know, hiring rock star salespeople. Maybe 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your best people. And if their performance is poor, what happens? Well, we'll just fire our salespeople or fire our head of sales and get an even better rock star. Well, needless to say, again, we don't believe in that. We believe that at the bottom of the pyramid, you have your sales process, which you can then enforce through a combination of technology and coaching and training. And we'll talk about that today. How do you make playbooks so that you can provide your reps turn-by-turn directions? So keep that in mind. We're going to show you how you can do Waze or Google Maps for salespeople. So with that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Sari, who's going to first sort of define what kind of playbooks we're really talking about, because there's two types of playbooks that you might and that you probably need to develop for your company. There is onboarding versus ongoing playbooks, and she'll take us through some of the differences between the two.
Perfect, thanks, Dominique. So you can go to the next slide. Great, so yeah, as Dominique mentioned, there's this really important distinction here of onboarding programs versus ongoing sales playbooks. And every sales team has some kind of ongoing sales process, right? Whether, you know, that's extremely well defined or not. But a lot of companies overlook the fact that how you bring new reps onto your team should be a very different program and process than that ongoing one, with very different goals and different ways of measuring success. So let's quickly define what we mean here between the two of them. And then I'm going to go through the elements of what an onboarding program is and how you measure that. And then Dominique's going to do the same thing for the sales process later on. So every good onboarding program should cover the three key areas of product, market, and sales process. And we'll talk about what's involved in each of those. It should also be a repeatable program that you run every time you bring in a new class of reps onto your team. It's not just a one-time event. And the ultimate goal of that onboarding program is to reduce your ramp time for new hires, getting them up to speed and running and selling effectively as quickly as possible. There's, of course, other ways to measure the success of an onboarding program, and we'll talk about those. But the ultimate primary metric that you're going after is reducing the time to ramp for your new hires. Then your sales playbook, on the other hand, is the process that you use to continuously improve that productivity that productivity of your sales reps. So that's how we're defining each of those. What's common between them is that both should be measured and improved upon over time. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk quickly about goals for each one and how you measure success. I apologize, I'm getting over a cough here. Okay, key metrics. So for an onboarding program, like I mentioned, the key metric here is time to ramp. And we define that as the time it takes for a new rep to hit 80% of their quota. Now, your goal for your time to ramp should vary based on the type of product that you sell. So assuming that everyone here is selling software, your goal should be a max of about 90 days for applications and a max of about 180 days for platform products. And that difference is just because of the complexity of the product generally. Now, for ongoing sales playbooks, your key metric here is the percentage of reps that hit their quota. So then the next question that sales leaders would normally ask here is, well, I don't want to wait 180 days or 90 days to then find out for the first time how many of my reps are going to hit quota. That's too late, right? So here's how you can start to understand how your reps are doing that before that time. And we'll cover this more in a minute, but just to kind of put this bug in your ear, we use this framework called REX, results, efforts, knowledge, and skills, REX. These are the key areas that contribute to a rep hitting their quota. And if you measure a set of metrics in each of these areas, you'll have a really good idea of where exactly that rep needs to improve in order to hit that key metric. And like I said, we'll talk about that more in a bit. And then the other ones here are classic, I'm sure ones that all of you are all very familiar with and measuring all the time. Things like conversion rates at each stage of your sales cycle, or how long your sales cycle is, or your average deal size. Okay, next slide, please. So that's how you start to think about these two areas. Let's talk about, let's focus in on the onboarding program specifically and talk about how we make this a reality. What should we go and do now in order to build this? Okay, 3 key elements. I don't think any of this is complicated. We'll talk about these 3 areas first, and then I'm going to tell you about the things that you may not know if you haven't built something like this before. So real quick, a key element in your onboarding program should be product training. So this would include things like, say, a presentation from your VP of product, including your product vision and feature roadmap. It would include formal product demos and walkthroughs, and then leave it unstructured time for your new reps to actually use the product themselves and get to know it themselves. Then something like market training. So market training includes things like industry knowledge, giving reps industry resources for self-study on their own time, reviewing marketing and messaging, talking about where leads come from, the sources of leads, and those types of leads. It should also include an overview of your competitors here and how you stack up. One thing I would caution here, though, is not to get too deep into this, because sales reps often really love to focus on this right away so that they feel like they're prepared if a customer brings up, oh, well, what about competitor A? What about competitor B? And reps tend to focus on understanding that knowledge before they spend enough time in their product to get to know their own product really well. So that's just a note of caution there. And then for sales process training, this includes things like, what is your sales process, obviously, training on how to use your CRM, reviewing quota and compensation, and pitch practice and certification. So let's go to the next slide. Because all that is pretty straightforward, but here's some things that you may not know if you haven't run one of these in a really structured way at your company before. So first, most companies think of onboarding as just the first week or 2. And we now know that wouldn't make sense, right? Because we're measuring success by a ramp time, and that's 90 days or 180 days. So that means that your onboarding program should run at least 90 days or 180 days. Whatever that definition is for your company, your onboarding isn't done until you've made it through at least that period. And I'm not trying to say that all hours of those 90 or 180 days are spent in training, but it does mean that there's structured learning going on throughout that time. Next, training new team members should be the responsibility of the entire company. I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but here's what I mean by that. So 1, company leadership should be involved in onboarding. And I'll give you an example of what we did at Xamarin. When I ran our onboarding program at Xamarin, I asked our VPs of sales and marketing and product and support to all come and present to the new hires. So our new hires heard directly from those VPs about the company vision and where we were heading. And afterwards, reps told me that this was one of the best parts of the onboarding program for them because they heard directly from these company leaders and they got to connect with them. They got to ask them questions right away on their second day. And a lot of them, came back and said, oh, well, I didn't even think I would have access to, our company leadership. Like, it was so great to be able to speak directly with them. And it really set the tone. Reps needed to be motivated by this company leadership and internalize that vision. And so that message, I believe, is always best delivered directly from leadership rather than sort of passed down in a game of telephone, wherever possible. Another best practice here is that there should be one person coordinating the program. And here's what usually happens instead of this. Your company is growing, your VP of sales will ask sales managers to just put something together for, your new class of hires starting next week because no one's really prepared anything yet. And this doesn't work because it will fall to the bottom of all of their priority lists. You have to have one person be on point for coordinating the program and for really owning it and making sure that it gets executed. That said, though, that one person must get input from sales managers on what that program looks like. If not, here's what happens. The sales managers won't really believe in the program. And if they don't believe in it, then they're going to tell their new rep who just got hired for their team, just like skip those last few onboarding sessions. I need you to get on the phone. You'll learn faster that way. And my team's really small right now. We need a lot of help. And that doesn't work either. It's setting that rep up for failure. And the sales manager will probably think that it's helping that rep out, but in the end, it really doesn't help them out. It ends up setting them back. So your program has to have the buy-in of sales managers who see the value in it, and you want those sales managers to want their reps to go through the full program and to encourage them to get as much as they can out of that program. Okay, next slide, please. All right, just a few more here. So this next one is really important to formalize rather than just letting it happen organically. You should set up all of your new hires with mentors and buddies who are their peers on the first day. So we know after training hundreds of sales teams at Winning by Design that reps love learning from their peers much more than they actually like learning from their managers or people who are much senior to them. Both are valuable, but it's a very different way of learning. So make sure you assign a new rep, their peer buddy, and a mentor who is only slightly senior to them. And this is how they start to form more team connections. And they learn that tribal knowledge that we all know kind of lives in the brains of our team, but it isn't really written down anywhere. They start to form that and absorb that really quickly. Okay, next is there's no such thing as too much exposure to the product. I can't emphasize this enough. A big portion of your onboarding program should be working with customer support. Usually that's, learning how support tickets are answered. This is the best way to learn the intricacies of your product, hands down. It doesn't really sound all that sexy, but it's the best way to actually see the true voice of the customer from day one. And most companies don't do this, and their reps really miss out by not understanding the true issues that customers have. Then we have getting enough shadow time. So I mentioned earlier, sales managers love to get reps on the phone as soon as possible. This totally makes sense, right? Because, we need our reps to be talking to customers on the phone in order to sell, but they have to be ready. So if a brand new rep gets on the phone too early, that's a perfect recipe to damage your customer relationships and have the confidence of that new rep just take a total nosedive. So the more time they have to shadow other sales reps, the better. But we recommend that this shadowing is done in two different ways. The first is the obvious one that I think a lot of companies already do. That's just listening to live customer calls, right? But the second, which most teams don't do yet, is listening to call recordings. And if you have a library of call recordings, reps can easily go through that, download them, play them back at a faster speed to be able to get through calls quickly, and they can experience so many more call situations and customer pain points this way. So I highly recommend having a library of call recordings that anyone can be able to search through and listen to later on. And here's the key with call recordings. You need to have structured homework for active listening. So it's not just, hey, go listen to this call. because what happens then? So what we do with the teams that we train at Winning by Design is we show them how to score call recordings with a bingo card. And Dominique is going to show you more in a few minutes about exactly what this looks like. So look out for that. I love this approach because it's one of the simplest, but also the most effective tools that we give our sales reps, and it helps them get up to speed really fast. And it's just fun. It turns into a fun game. It makes it a lot of fun. And then finally, your onboarding program should get better every single time you run it. So it's this concept of continuous improvement that we always talk about. So for example, after I ran our onboarding program each month at Xamarin, 1 month after that program was completed, I would get that new hire class back in a room together. We'd sit down for an hour and I would ask them just general questions like, hey, what was the most helpful thing for you that you learned a month ago? What was the least helpful thing? And the reason that I do it a month later is because they're not going to remember every single thing they learned in onboarding, but the ones that they really do remember are definitely still going to stand out to them. And that's what I want to hear about. And I want to hear about both the good and the bad, what was helpful and what was really not helpful at all, where they felt like it just wasn't a good use of time. And every single month, the reps always had great ideas for what else we could do to make the program better. So I was constantly improving the program each month. And it's just a fun way to kind of get the new hire class back together and reconnect, and people, would sort of tell stories about what they're doing in their new roles and learn again that way. So it's also another good sort of organic learning opportunity. Okay, so those are principles. Next slide, please. So let's go through a quick case study of what this actually looks like. Great, okay. So this is just a sample of what the first 2 weeks of training might look like. This is highly simplified, obviously, but here's the general structure of it. So each day has a new topic that's taught in the morning, and then a way to practice those skills through active role play in the afternoon, and then some kind of shadowing or informal connecting with team members to talk about what they've learned and wrap up the day. And I'm not going to talk through all this. We're going to send out this slide after, or we're going to send out the whole deck after, but I'll send out a more detailed example of this as well, so you can kind of look through and absorb it. So let's talk about how to test all this, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned this concept earlier of REX, results, effort, knowledge, and skills. So we recommend that sales managers measure their new reps on these 4 pillars or areas throughout the onboarding period. And it doesn't have to be complicated or super prescriptive, but you should be paying attention to these 4 areas so that you don't get surprised, after those 90 days or after those 100 days. And here's exactly what we mean by REX, just to define what each of these areas are. So results is pretty obvious. That's, the measurable outcome of efforts in the role. So depending on your role, whether, you're inbound, outbound, SDR, AE, whatever it is, that might include things like meetings held or opportunities created or deals closed or revenues closed. Then effort is the specific activities for that role that role should be performing. So these activities are things like number of calls made or number of emails sent or number of discovery calls. Then knowledge is usually tracked through certification tests. So this could be things like the rep's knowledge on each part of your platform, or their score on product quizzes, or knowing how to handle detailed objections appropriately about the product. And then skills refers to how they apply their knowledge to be an effective seller. So it might be their ability to run that effective discovery call, or their ability to run an effective demo, or applying the industry knowledge that they have to customer questions appropriately. So it's more operationalizing that knowledge that they have. So if you start to sort of score a rep on each of these 4 areas as they're going through their onboarding, you're going to start to see a pattern emerge. And if you look at the example on this slide where you have the yellow bars, this rep's knowledge seems to be really high, right? But his results are definitely less than ideal. So what could be happening here? You could, try helping them increase their effort. Their effort is sort of middle of the road. So maybe, the lower volume is driving lower results. Or maybe the rep is having difficulty applying that knowledge. They clearly, are scoring really high on the knowledge that they have. Maybe it's more translating it to customer situations. So it may be that more role play is needed to give this rep practice in doing that. So that's just a really simplified way that you can apply this framework of reps to understanding how your reps are performing and helping make sure that they're going to be successful once they emerge out of that onboarding period. And in addition to this deck after, I'm going to send out a sheet as well that has a lot of examples of what metrics you can look at in each of these 4 categories to get a sense more of like what that would look like. Okay, so that covers all of our content for today about onboarding. I'm going to turn it back to Dominique now, and she's going to cover how to operationalize your ongoing playbooks. Dom?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sari. Yeah, so if we now look at ongoing playbooks, we're going to actually pick it up where Sari left off, right? So we're going to keep that Rex thing in mind. Now, the first thing about an ongoing playbook, which is really the definition of your sales process and what every rep should say or do in every stage of your sales process to maximize results. So our philosophy is that less is more in this case. And I'm going to challenge you to create a playbook that fits on one page or that fits on one whiteboard. So this is what that might look like. Now, if you are, I say page or whiteboard. So if you're earlier in your development and maybe you've just received, your round of funding, you've reached product market fit, and you're really trying to still figure out what is basically what we call go-to-market fit, right? Like what is it that you need to say or do? Or what is it really that the founders did when they were selling the product so successfully to those first 30 customers? You might create this on a whiteboard in the middle of your office. It might be a Google Sheet that's shared so people can collaborate. But at the end of the day, you're going to create along the top, right? So you see the horizontal axis, the different columns here are different stages of your sales process. What you see here on this particular sheet is what I call a consultative or solution sale. If you have a more complicated sale, maybe a larger deal size, you might have a provocative sale. There might be somewhat different stages, right? In that case, there is more wrangling of different stakeholders in the organization. And I might not be able to go discovery, demo, proposal, trade, close. I may need to have a stage in there that says, I need to have a stakeholder meeting, maybe an executive workshop. So I give my champion the opportunity to bring the decision maker and the different influencers to the party, etc. And we'll see an example of, again, some other activities or stages that you may need depending on your particular process. But that's really the first thing you're going to do, right? You're going to define these sort of distinct steps. Sometimes we call them key moments of interaction between your reps and the customer. So loosely, these actually align with meetings that are happening, right? Stage 1 conversation is maybe the outbound call. Stage 2 discovery is the discovery call. Stage 3 is the demo. Stage 4 is a presentation of your impact proposal to the customer. Stage 5 here is a conversation, a negotiation, trading conversation about that. So that's the first thing you do. And then you see that actually along the vertical axis, these racks things come back, right? So the top is, let's define what should be the outcome or the result of each of the stages. And then what are the activities? What are the things, the key things that the rep should say or do in each of these stages? And we'll see in a minute that this might become a checklist in your CRM. So you're not going to write down everything, right? But you're going to really try and write down those critical few things that always need to happen, and that if they happen, seem to make a difference and improve the stage-to-stage conversion rate and the ultimate outcome of the deal. Then you see the next row is knowledge. So this might be, these typically are live links to further resources. So you see it could be cue cards, templates, and we'll see some examples of that in a second. So sort of a double click. And then you also see here a list of some of the skills that the rep needs to have in order to execute these efforts properly. And then lastly, there's a concept we call connecting the wagons, which I won't go into detail now, but it's basically scheduling the next step. So at the end of this stage, right, what should have happened? So in the end of the outbound call, a discovery call should have been scheduled and so forth. And if you have questions, but any of this we're going to send out. This is the template of a template that you can use that we will be sending out after. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, so this is your one-page sales playbook and something that we can go operationalize by creating checklists into your CRM to give people turn-by-turn directions and to verify that people are actually following this process. But it's not quite enough. We do want to go one layer deeper. So what we're going to do now is basically a double click on the second column here, the column of the discovery call. And we'll get to another one pager. This is actually a physical representation of what good looks like for a general discovery call. And in a minute, I'll show you a case study of an actual company and how they've translated this. But that's a high level, a discovery call and a solution or consultative sale. Again, a little bit different if you had a challenger or provocative sale. But we'll go something like this. So every meeting should start with what we call an ACE, which is I appreciate your time. Let's check the end time of the meeting, because if you don't check the end time, your champion may leave just before you were scheduling next steps. And then you want to schedule an end goal of the meeting. So by the end of this webinar, I hope that you will have a better idea of how to structure your onboarding and ongoing playbook. Right, that could be the end goal of this meeting. And if you do have that, the next step might be that you download the templates we provided in this webinar and apply that to your own company. So that could be, again, the end goal of the webinar that we're on right now. Then I define the agenda, which we did at the beginning. And now I start asking questions. So most good discovery calls start with what we call closed-ended situational questions that are based on research. So I might start asking questions about, I noticed that you recently closed a round of funding from Insight Partners. And I also noticed, is that correct? Oh yeah, we're so excited about that. I also noticed that, you have a lot of recs out there for salespeople. Is that correct? Oh yeah, we're looking to hire another 50 with all this new money that we got. Okay, that's great. Now I'm going to ask an open-ended pain question to try and get you to talk about that. Like, tell me, how are you going to onboard all these new salespeople? And then hopefully the prospect, will start to talk. Anyway, we'll go through the whole framework here, but the key is that we're not providing a script here, but we're providing sort of a framework, and along the horizontal axis is the progression of the conversation, but it's actually time. You'll see an example in a minute that actually sort of helps the rep to do some time budgeting to make sure that they have enough time at the end, for example, to schedule next steps, or that they have enough time in the middle to tell a story of a third-party reference of another customer that you might have helped. So this is the double click on each column. So there exists a picture for each of the columns in that playbook, or we recommend you create that. That's basically sort of a visual checklist of what a good discovery call looks like. And that's going to have a lot of benefits, including the ability to do peer coaching, and we'll see that in a minute. Now you can go even further. So this is, I guess, a double click into that picture of what the good discovery call would look like, where I identify not just should a good discovery call start with closed-ended questions, then move to open-ended questions around pain, and then maybe after that I might ask an impact question. What if I could reduce onboarding time from 18 months to 3 months? What would that be worth to your company? That would be an impact question. But here I'm helping reps, with some sample questions, right, for that. So again, it's not a script, but it's a framework where you identify the key elements that good reps follow. And you can obviously try and discover this by interviewing and listening in to your best performing reps and or the founders if you're making the transition from founder sales to professional sales team. I mentioned I would go show a quick case study. This is anonymized, but this is a company that recently raised quite a large amount of money and is rapidly scaling their sales team and really had a need, therefore, to formalize what's the onboarding process, but also make sure that there was more consistency of rep to rep performance. So you see here again a similar sheet with their particular sales stages, also a little bit of who does what between the SDR and the AE. And I've highlighted here in yellow a couple things that didn't necessarily show up on that template that you saw earlier, but that were things that they had discovered about their particular sales process that were very important. So even though they're following a fairly standard solution sale, outbound call, discovery, demo, actually those two are combined in this case, which we'll get to in a minute. The next thing that they found was that there was high conversion of that top of funnel, but then a lot of deals got stuck. So it really seemed like in that case, buyers needed more help. Prospects needed more help to buy, basically. And if you looked at the best reps, not all the reps, but out of 100 people, there were 2 or 3 people that used this thing that they call a joint evaluation plan. So they had actually created a checklist where they would go to their champion and say, okay, this was, you're very interested in our solution. What we know from other prospects is that in order to come to a buying decision, most clients want to do a security check, they want to do a legal review, they want to do, there's sort of a checklist of things that typically happen during the buying process. So rather than waiting for the customer to find that out on their own, the best reps actually had that in a template that they shared with the champion, and then they were starting to have weekly meetings in order to guide the prospect through that buying process. So once they found that out, right, they now formalize that into the sales playbook, and they make it now a mandatory step that after the demo, all reps share a joint evaluation plan of which they've now provided the template with the reps or with the customer, and then have weekly meetings to sort of compress the sales cycle and to avoid all these sort of stranded deals, if that makes sense. The second thing that was really important to this particular company was that they only get paid once the customer is live. So their business model is such that all the payments sort of follows later on based on usage, of the product. And so they were closing a lot of deals, but then a lot of those deals didn't go live for quite a long time. And so the revenue would follow and be delayed too much. And so you see another couple yellow areas here towards stages 4, 5, and 6 that really have to do with how can we already during the sales process architect things in a way that would make sure that the go live date happens sooner. And so part of that was that as we're starting to do some solution design, some data that was going to be required for implementation, would already be collected during the sales process. And then you see here, we would start sharing a joint implementation plan. So evaluation plan is how to buy, implementation plan is, as the name implies, right, to do with how do I get to go live. And often the decision maker, like the business decision maker, actually has, there's a reason they buy the solution, right? They want to see the ROI. In this case, there were significant cost savings involved with being able to go live with this product. And so the business stakeholder had that aligned interest to go live very quickly. But what happened then, it got handed off maybe to a project manager, and that project manager had a lot of other things on their plate. The post-sale things would slow down because the project manager, the lower level employee, didn't have that same sense of urgency around realizing these cost savings. So by agreeing on a launch date with the business stakeholder, during the sales process, maybe even tying an ROI model to that, they were able to create more urgency post-sale as well with the lower level team responsible for implementation. So again, this is just an example. You see some of these things, right, that might be specific to your company and your sales process, that if every rep were to do this, would significantly improve results. Okay, in the interest of time, I can't spend much time on this, but this was a double click. I mentioned this particular company had a combined discovery call and demo in one in order to compress the sales cycle. So their particular flow chart, of course, looks different. And you also see up top that time budget that I was talking about that gives people a sense of how to budget their time. So they really have this pasted up on their monitor to guide themselves along. Now, this is from the same company, a customer success playbook. So post-sale, no different. In this particular case, I mentioned it was very important to get to go live very quickly. And what was very important for that is to make sure that the business stakeholder that I mentioned had the same sense of urgency around the launch date was actually present at the kickoff. So this is the double click on the kickoff call. Now, most companies do a pretty good job at a technical kickoff, meaning scheduling training, account implementation, etc., but miss the opportunity to do what I call a business kickoff. And again, for this particular company, that was super important to make sure. And one of the keys, again, to success turned out to go live quickly and to realize revenue quickly was to get that decision maker to participate at least in the first half, of that kickoff and say, hey, we're going to share some best practices. This is, remember, the first time that you're on the same side of the table, right? You're now partners, no more posturing, no more negotiating. I'm on the same side of the table and I want to be successful. And again, having that decision maker, executive sponsor attend that first half of that kickoff call became very important, so that together we define what does success look like, what does first value look like, right? The first sort of initial success, maybe first 30 days, and what is, where would you like to be in 1 year? And then you can work backwards and actually leverage your business stakeholder and your customer to drive urgency, maybe with the implementation team. But again, you see here how, doing that double click, like what does a good kickoff look like, right? Will help to have people execute. A good kickoff has two parts: business kickoff, technical kickoff. You need to split your time about evenly between those two, etc. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what does good look like. Now, how do you test this thing? We actually can make calls and meetings A/B testable, just like you can A/B test emails. And it's a very small step. So we said we started out with this thing, right? Now I mentioned once you have your one-page sales playbook, you can now start to create checklists in your CRM. This happens to be a tool called Membrane. It's just a plugin to Salesforce, but you can do it natively in Salesforce or any other CRM as well, where I say, okay, what are those things, right, that I have identified, and make them mandatory fields or mandatory check boxes into your CRM. Because once you do that, you can now know how many of my reps are actually following the process. And of the reps that are following the process, are they seeing better results? If not, I need to change the playbook. If yes, I need to make sure everybody follows the playbook. Does that make sense? Okay, so you can actually do the same thing for this next level down. So this, again, was sort of the high level, let's say, framework of what a good discovery call is. I can now create a scorecard that summarizes those key things that need to happen on every good discovery call. So at the end of every call, if you sort of look at the bottom right here, right, I want to ask the client, I want to summarize what was discussed. I want to ask the client if they're ready for the next step. I want to schedule the next step, but I don't want to stop there. I want to also ask, what do you want to get out of the next step, and what other people would benefit from attending that next meeting? Very simple things, but I can tell you, making sure that all your reps consistently do those last 3 questions will probably give you another 3 to 5% of conversion rate. And by the way, if you could just get 10% improvement, right, to go from 30% to 33% of close rate, let's say, right, and you do that for each of those stages in your sales cycle, you've just doubled your revenue without adding a single rep or without adding a single lead. So this can have a really big impact very quickly. But yeah, once I have a scorecard like this, I can do a lot of cool things. I can now ask reps to score their own calls, or I can ask reps to score each other. I have now an objective definition of what is a good discovery call, and now I can push coaching down to the peers, right, like Sari was saying. So I no longer, as a manager, have to do all the coaching, or as a central trainer or enablement person. People can do self-evaluation and improvement, and people can help each other just by using this bingo card. So sometimes we have people print this out, and literally laminate it and use it as a bingo game. Or what you can do is you can use call analytics software. So this is an example from a scorecard, implemented in a tool called Refract. But Gong, Chorus, I mean, you've probably heard of these. All these call recording and analytics softwares now have the scorecards that are customizable built in. So that is a great way to say, and you can do now the same thing as we did with the one-page playbook. You can say how many reps are actually following what we've taught them about a good discovery call through these scorecards. So that's process adherence. And of the reps that are following the guidance and the prescription that we gave them for what a good discovery call looks like, are they actually having better results? So if not, again, I can start moving things around in the call. I can start asking different questions. and I can see if that has a better result. Obviously, you can do this yourself as well. This is an example of one of our customers that just did it in Google Sheets. So not only did they build a Google Sheet that was a scorecard, they had a separate like leaderboard where there was a requirement of listening to and scoring a certain number of your own calls and a certain number of peer calls, and they tracked that just through Google Sheets as well. All right, I know we're close to time, so I'm going to quickly hand it back to Sarah to give you a couple supplemental resources that you can use.
Sure, sounds good. So we have a bunch of things that you can take a look at if you have more questions or want to learn more about any of these topics. First, real quick, if you want to have a look at some of the books that we have, you can find those on Amazon. If you search for Winning by Design, we have books that are customized for each role within the sales process. So that's a great resource. We also have a YouTube channel where you can go and hear directly from, excuse me, directly from our trainers on different topics where they talk through very specific skills like how to demo or how to set up a sales pod. So check that out as well, our Winning by Design YouTube channel. And then finally, if you go to Lucidchart, and you set up a free account on Lucidchart and then search for the sales winning by design category of templates, you will be able to see all of the process flows, some of which Dominique already showed you, all in Lucidchart, and then you can update those and create custom versions for your own sales process if you like. So there's a ton of content out there that you can sort of absorb and then customize and make yours. And here's our contact information. If you guys have any questions about any of this, want to talk further, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We have a couple of minutes left, though. If anyone has questions, we'd be happy to answer those now in a quick Q&A.